Hi, my name is Ya Cao. Today I want to talk to you about Bill Nye, the unscientific guy. I have been making videos explaining Christianity in Chinese for many years. This is the first video in English. Recently, I was introduced to watch the debate between Mr. Bill Nye and Mr. Ken Ham. It was a very interesting debate. Both of them are very famous, especially Mr. Nye. He has a nickname to be the science guy. However, today I want to show you when talking about existence of God, he is very unscientific. In the debate, Mr. Nye talked about the snow ice layers. How did the layers formed? By packing the snow layer by layer. Mr. Nye made a huge mistake by assuming one layer is formed in 1 year. What if in a year there were many snowstorms and the snow packed over and over again? It is very obvious that one cannot assume that each layer is the result of 1 year of snowpack. Mr. Nye uses wrong assumption trying to mislead people. We can see another example.
So let's see, if there are 4,000 years since Ken Ham's flood, and let's say, as he said many times, there are 7,000 kinds. Today, the very lowest estimate is that there are about 8.7 million species. But a much more reasonable estimate is it's 50 million. So we'll take a number which I think is pretty reasonable, 16 million species today, okay? If these came from 7,000 kinds, let's say we have 7,000 subtracted from 15 million, that's 15,993. We have 4,000 years, we have 365 and a quarter days a year. We would expect to find 11 new species every day. So the Cincinnati Enquirer, I imagine, would carry a column right next to the weather report. Today's new species, and it would list these 11 every day. But we see no evidence of that.
But the problem with this argument is that he assumed that evolution has been a linear process, one species after another. As we can see, the evolution is far from linear. He did not take into the consideration that, in fact, all 7,000 kinds of animals were evolving simultaneously in parallel. If evolution is true, every living thing is evolving at the same time. It is simply wrong to use division to mislead people. Mr. Nye wrongly subtracted the 7,000 from 16 million. If the arithmetic is anything resemble the true situation, he ought to at least divide it by 7,000. From the so-called evolution tree, evolution is more like an exponential expansion, which is almost impossible to calculate. Mr. Nye's arithmetic is simply wrong. Very obviously, if you got the facts wrong, how can you be scientific? Mr. Nye also talked about kangaroo in Australia.
Now, one of the extraordinary claims associated with Mr. Ham's worldview is that this giant boat, very large wooden ship, went aground safely on a mountain in the Middle East, what we now call the Middle East. And so places like Australia are populated then by animals who somehow managed to get from the Middle East all the way to Australia in the last 4,000 years. Now that to me is an extraordinary claim. We would expect then, somewhere between the Middle East and Australia, we would expect to find evidence of kangaroos. We would expect to find some fossils, some bones. In the last 4,000 years, somebody would have been hopping along there and died along the way, and we'd find them. And furthermore, there's a claim that there was a land bridge that allowed these animals to get from Asia all the way to the continent of Australia, and that land bridge has disappeared in the last 4,000 years. No navigator, no diver, no U.S. Navy submarine, no one's ever detected any evidence of this, let alone any fossils of kangaroos.
This does seem to be a big problem, isn't it? However, Mr. Nye is pretty ignorant about something called continental drift. The theory and the facts can be easily found on the internet. The theory is that before the Great Flood, the Earth was one big continent called Pangaea, and Australia was right there. Because the great amount of water created great water pressure and the volcanic activity of the Earth, eventually the land broke up to form the continents of the Earth we know today.
Supercontinent Pangaea exists. Let's watch this movement as it occurred going forward in time. As Pangaea splits into 3 large pieces, the Atlantic Ocean starts to form. India starts its race to collide with Asia. As the continents take their current locations, India and Asia collide, and the Himalayas and Mount Everest appear.
Scientists have found the plant and animal fossils found in India, for example, are often remarkably similar to those found in Australia. If you look at the picture, the colored areas show the same types of fossils. Therefore, the evidence supports the theory. If you look also at the deep ocean valleys along the continents, also the ring of fire, meaning where the volcanic activity occurs, also indicated the continent drift took place. Kangaroos have always been in Australia, except Australia was drifted away. Therefore, you cannot find the traces of kangaroo migration. Mr. Nye also talked about boulders found on top of ground. He said if there was a great flood, the boulders would have sunk in the ground. The problem with Mr. Nye's assumption, again, is that there were no activities happened between the time of the flood to now. However, we know there is a constant orogeny, which literally means mountain building activities. The reason we have earthquakes is pretty much because of that. The boulders were the results of orogeny. Unfortunately, Mr. Nye is very ignorant about that too. If you are ignorant, you are not scientific. Mr. Nye also talked about wooden ships. In England, they tried to build a large wooden warship called Wyoming, but failed miserably. The Noah's Ark was bigger than the Wyoming. How could it be possible? This is understandably why, because warship needed to be narrow so that it could be maneuverable in battle situation. Wooden battleship is just impossible. If a king of England wanted to build a battleship, how long do you think he was willing to wait? 5 years, 10 years? By the time he builds, maybe his kingdom is over. Ark was different. It took Noah 120 years to build. The ark is not a battleship. The only purpose which was to sustain life. There was no need to be maneuverable. God knows everything. Even Noah and his son were inexperienced. According to the Bible, Noah listened to God's instructions and he built the ark accordingly, so it could stand the flood and preserve life. It is simply wrong to say England couldn't build a wooden battleship so that no ark could be built. Mr. Nye knows a lot of science. Otherwise, he would not have gotten the nickname the Science Guide. But it is a shame when he wants to oppose God, he became ignorant and unscientific. He used wrong assumptions, he ignored obvious things, and he doesn't check all the facts. When it comes down to existence of God, he became unscientific. What a shame! The atheists want to reject God. They are willing to let go their reasoning. Atheist argues that God does not exist. How do we know God exists? Let's think about something first. If you ask a child to count from 1 up, he will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The question on how long does it take for him to reach infinity? Anyone with a sound mind would tell you that it is impossible. It would take forever still not able to reach it. For the same token, you cannot reach 1 from infinity either. If you take any presently existing object, it cannot count for its own existence. It needs a cause. The cause must have pre-existed before the effect. You then go backward to find a cause of the cause. You will then get a chain of causes and effects. It takes time to go from a cause to its effect, just like counting numbers. The question is, how many causes exist in this chain? It could be a finite number of them, or it could be infinite number of them. If there were infinite number of them, we have talked about this already, starting from the cause infinity away, it would never reach the present time. But the present time do exist. That means our assumption that there were infinite number of them is wrong. Therefore, it can only be finite number of them. Since there are only finite number of them, so you can find the first cause, which is God. So God does exist. Now, the atheists must have a problem with that. They said, if God created the universe, who created God? Or they will say, if everything needs a cause, how come God is an exception? Let's say, if God exists, but who created God? So God is created by a super God. Then immediately you must ask whether this super God needs a cause. So then a super God must exist. Then a super God, then super God exists. On and on. Then we come to a problem. How many gods exist in this chain? Are they finite or infinite of them? We have gone through this problem already. There cannot be infinite, only finite number of them. Since there are only finite of them, you can go to the first one. There's no one before it, otherwise it wouldn't be the first. Therefore, the first one does not have a cause. Now, this is a result of a logical deduction. Infinite number of causes is impossible. Therefore, the first one is God. The rest with causes are not. Therefore, God is always there, needing no cause. All things have causes, but God is not a thing because He is the Creator. God is always there. He needs no cause. So whatever Bill Nye, the unscientific guy, says, God exists and atheists are wrong.